Good evening. We're going to get started in 6 minutes. You will want to get something to drink, a coffee or a tea, and something to write your notes and your thoughts down. So you have about 5 or 6 minutes before we get started. In 3 minutes. For those who have just joined us, I recommend you grab something to drink, a tea or a coffee, as well as something to write your thoughts down, a tablet, or if you're like me, a paper pen, something just to collect your thoughts and questions down as we go through this presentation. We'll be getting started in 3 minutes. Good evening and welcome everyone to the Masonic Seminar Series. My name is Katie Kumsier and I am the presenter and facilitator of this group. I want to welcome everyone who's coming in on real time and those who will be joining us later on recording, as well as those coming around the world and those that it's their first time, as well as their multiple time of being with us. We are grateful that you will spend time in learning a little bit about Freemasonry and tonight, astrology. A little bit of the background of us, just for those who are new. Universal Co-Masonry has created and supported the Masonic Seminar Series as a way to help build in foundation on just what Masonry is in general. As there's a lot of curiosity around it, there's also some misconceptions and not a lot of information that's out there that can be accurate. So we try to use this platform as a way to assist people in their journey of seeking towards the light. This is a different type of platform for those who attend our Masonic Philosophical Society. This is a lecture-based presentation, and it's episodic, meaning that all the topics are standalone. So if you're joining us for the first time, or maybe you missed a couple months, you're in no harm of losing any information. That being said, I do want to preface that I've kind of gone off of the beaten path this year. Normally I present completely separate, unrelated topics, but I wanted to build in the Western Esoteric Tradition. So the last several months, we've been looking at various spiritual traditions that come into the Western Esoteric Tradition, such as Gnosticism, Neoplatonism, Hermeticism, obviously Freemasonry is in there. And tonight we're going to start the Western Esoteric Sciences, which is a part of the tradition, and those are 3 in number, which is astrology, Kabbalah, and alchemy. So next month we'll do Kabbalah, and then we'll conclude before our August break, which is going to be on alchemy. And as always, I'm very excited to talk about this topic, as every topic, because it's also interesting. This one's a little bit different in the fact that there's a lot of information. I was just talking to the brothers here, Brother Patrick and Brother Benjamin, who are helping me on the Masonic Seminar Series, that there's just a lot of information. So you may find that I'm not going to stop nearly as much as I might, and I'm going to ask them to wave me down if there's just a lot of questions building up. So if you're coming in from our Zoom platform, Brother Benjamin Hartle's going to be taking care of that. Start pinging your questions on. You can do it either in the group chat, or you can send it to him directly and he will flag me down once it starts to build up. And Brother Patrick is taking care of our other platforms of X, Twitter, and I think YouTube is the 3rd one. So if you have questions coming in on those streams, you can put them in and Brother Patrick will wave me down. That way I can assist in the questions without losing time. All right. So like I said, there is a lot of information on astrology, and I want to pull up, I have a glare on my computer. I can't see my polls. I want to pull up a poll, which I normally don't do, and I cannot find it. Brother Benjamin, can you help me? There's just a glare of the light coming up on my computer to help me find my polls. I'm sorry, I apologize for this difficulty. Where's my polls? They moved them. All right, we'll just do it by a show of hands. Thank you. I had a poll, but it's not that big of a deal. We'll just do it by hands. So if you're coming on our Zoom platform, do a virtual hand. Don't just do a physical. Ooh, Brother Patrick. All right, we're going to launch a quick poll just so I know what my audience is. It's always good to talk to the audience. And it's, do you believe in astrology? I don't care how you define it. I don't care what your interaction is. It's just a yes, no. And some people don't, kind of the jury's out. They don't really know what astrology is and whether or not they're going to should believe in it, or is it just kind of a scam? So just go ahead and take a quick poll. If you're coming in on our other platforms, go ahead and shoot a message to Patrick, Brother Patrick, and he can get your voice heard as well. So we're going to just take a quick second to run this poll. I normally don't do this, but I just really want to know where my audience is before I start talking. So I'll give you about 20 seconds before we check in to see where we're at. And I believe the poll is anonymous, not that I would publish your personal information anyway, but it is anonymous. So if you want to put your information out there, that'd be great. So right now we have about 10 seconds left and we have about 75% reporting in. We're looking at 69% saying yes, they believe in it, 11% saying no. I'm glad you joined because I didn't think anyone might join if they didn't believe in the topic. And we have about 18, 19% unsure. And Brother Patrick, do we have anyone coming in on the platforms on their votes? I'm going to end this poll here.
Let's see, no one on platforms yet, but they'll be a little bit delayed.
Delayed, okay. All right, so I'm going to stop it here. So quickly put in your last choice, or quickly put in your answer before I stop it. All right, we're going to end here. All right, so we have 71% says yes, 12% says no, and 17% says they're unsure. Well, hopefully, I mean, most of the audience here believes in it and probably has done a little bit of study or has some understanding in it. And I hope that no matter what camp you fall in on your belief in astrology, I hope you walk away with a better understanding, not only how Freemasonry is related to it, but also what astrology is intended to do. So let me, Brother Benjamin, can you flip my computer forward a little bit, my screen? It's just tilted kind of weird. I'm high maintenance out here. Thank you. All right. All right, so let's look at what we're going to be looking at for the next hour and a half. So again, this is a part of an arc. If you happen to miss any of the previous months on this particular arc of the Western Esoteric Tradition, gentlemen, if you could put in your various platforms a link to our YouTube, you can go back and find past recordings, or if you missed a month, or if you're new, you can go back and look. All right, so what we're going to do for the next hour and a half is I need to undo some misconceptions, because a lot of idea of what astrology is not accurate. Mainly like, oh, I'm a Gemini and this is who I am. And that's not really, yes, it talks about astrology, but that's really not astrology. And, you know, on July 5th, you're going to get this amount of money, or this person's going to pass away. Like, that's not really astrology. So I need to undo some misconceptions. Hopefully I can ask you to suspend some beliefs that you have in Masonry and astrology to add in new foundational information. We're going to look at Western Esoteric Tradition astrology, which is wet astrology, just because it's really long. We're going to look at that specifically, and then we're going to look at what, in order to be an astrological system, what do you need to have in place for it to be a formalized system? We're going to briefly look at the Masonic astrological system, because mainly it's brief. I mean, I say it's brief, it's like 4 slides, but I say it's brief because I can't go into huge detail of it, else it would be divulging way too much. If you are a Mason, I was thinking about writing a paper on it, on the specifics of it. You can hit me up on that on the side, and we can talk more about what that is in ritual. And then I want to look at an actual example of a Western esoteric traditional astrology system, which I think is fascinating. So that's what we're going to spend some time. I'm trying not to give you a history lesson, and I'm not going to read charts for anyone, but it is definitely going to be looking at astrology. So let's start with some misconceptions. The number one thing that I run into when people start talking astrology is that they believe astrology is deterministic, meaning that what is written in your chart, that chart of who you are, like where you're born, what time you were born, and the date that you were born, that sets you forever and you can never change. That is not true. Astrology is meant to provide you a lighting of patterns in your life. It lays a blueprint out for you to see, and then you have the freedom to move within it. It doesn't matter if you're looking at what I would call classical astrology in the sense of Western esoteric astrology, or if you're looking at contemporary astrology, which is the astrology present at our time at this moment. It is not deterministic. You're not bound by the stars to be this way forever. If you don't act upon the things in your character and in your soul, it can be very much a cemented path. But there is the ability to move within it. This is where a lot of people think that astrology is fortune telling. It is not. It is to help you reveal patterns and archetypes in your life. And when we look at the very end of this presentation, when we look at I'm going to show you the Hermetic astrological system, you'll understand more of what I mean, that it's not deterministic, it's not fatalistic. There's a lot of movement in there, but it does set the landscape for this life. If you believe in one life or in multiple, it doesn't matter. That astrology is the landscape in which you are living. Another misconception is that your sun sign. So if someone says, "Oh, what is your zodiac? You know, what is your zodiacal sign?" You know, it's an Aquarius, it's a Gemini, it's a Leo. That's the sun sign. That is not who you are completely. at all. It, like, who you are is so complex. To sit there and say you're one thing, I think is very naive and very ignorant, because you cannot just be one thing. And we'll look at complexity and the intricacy of astrology as we move through the system. About between the 1900s and the 1970s, you'll see there's a particular type of astrology that made the sun sign very famous and well known. So when people get tattoos of a zodiacal sign on them, it's usually their sun sign. So keep in mind, if you are a Cancer, that is not who you're going to be forever, and that doesn't completely sum you up. It is very nuanced. That astrology is based on superstition and magical thinking. This one's a really hard one to suspend belief in, because a lot of people are saying, well, you know, Saturn isn't telling me what I can and cannot do. Like, I don't believe that Saturn has an influence. You have to remember, first off, two things. The first thing you have to remember is that the worldview that astrology came through, so we'll look at it, Mesopotamia forward, up until the Age of Reason, the Age of Enlightenment, the Scientific Revolution, was all a geocentric model, meaning that the sun, or excuse me, the Earth was at the center of the solar system. And so everything is around that idea. And so this idea that Saturn is going to, you know, have a certain influence, it doesn't mean that. It represents a pattern of being. So when you look at astrology, it's not superstition, like, oh, if you don't follow your I keep saying Saturn, because Saturn's like the big one. People talk a lot about Saturn returns, and that's like every 28 years you experience a really big reckoning with your choices in life. That's why I keep bringing it up. It's one of the more impacting experiences if you've ever gone through it, if you're 28 and older. So when you look at superstition, astrology, every advanced civilization, when I say advanced, it means that they had advanced mathematics of some form, had an astrological system. Because before the scientific revolution, astronomy and astrology were the same science. Now at the scientific revolution and moving outward, we see that divergence where astrology is now a pseudoscience. It's a falsely or loosely claimed science, and astronomy obviously is a heavy-hitting science. It's an empirical science. But back in the day, it wasn't separated. And I don't know if necessarily it should be separated, because if we look at gravity, if I can just be a little technical here, gravity is going to exist between all masses, and it exerts impacts and forces, and it pulls and it pushes on each other. So of course, planets have effect on us, just like the moon has effect on the tides. So too do the planets have effect on the solar system. And we are within that, and we are a large amount of water. So whether or not Saturn is actually infusing its demons in us and causing us to be a certain way, like, that's not astrology. But looking at the patterns that lay out and what those planets represent, are those archetypes, those archetypal forces, is something that is real. It's just a way of looking at a planet, or looking at a pattern rather, and saying that that pattern is more represented by this planet. That's all it is. It's not saying that, you know, Jupiter's going to come and get you. That's very erroneous in the way that you should look at astrology. Again, planets imposing life events on individuals. When we look at astrology, it's a guideline. It's a way to look at, in two ways of looking at it. I didn't get to my second point on the last one, but oh well. Two ways of looking at it, which is, one is about the soul's experience in matter, or two, about psychological imperfections, depending on the astrological system you're going to look at. Planets, again, are just going to help you excavate ways to either get the soul to ascend out of matter, or to uncover those psychological imperfections or weaknesses to help you become more cognitively or consciously stable. They're not imposing, they're not in Hermeticism, they're called governors, or seven rulers of fate. They're not these governors as the Hermetic saw, where they are pushing down these ideas and making you live a certain way. It's not like that at all. That there's one type of astrology. This is another misconception, that all astrology is created the same, or some people think there's only two types of astrology. There's Western astrology and there's Vedic. And here's an example of all the different astrologies, starting back about 4,000 years ago with Mesopotamian astrology. Now, all of them are in there because there's quite a few. And I have my chart. I added more onto this particular diagram. So couched inside of Mesopotamian astrology is a very significant era, which is Babylonian. And that Babylonian is going to bleed through the Western Esoteric Tradition. That's why I bring it up. You have the Egyptian astrological system, Hellenistic, which is Roman, Greek and Egyptian influences. You have Greek timekeeping with, I am flipping myself also down. I'm getting excited. You have Egyptian time, and that comes together to create a Hellenistic astrology. Then you have the Vedic, which is in there, and then you have the Islamic and so forth and so on. Now you have what's called contemporary psychological astrology. That is where we are today. And you have modern Western astrology, which is from 1900 to 1970. So there's a lot of different astrologies. They're not all created the same. And I've met people that really enjoy the Vedic astrology, which I will be completely honest, I know nothing about. Not because I don't think it's important, I just haven't gotten there yet. So there's a lot of different astrologies out there, and they're not all created the same. So I want to go back to that idea that astrology requires a belief in magical, superstitious things. I would contend that with a statement. And it's a question, a statement as a question. If it requires so much magical thinking, why does every advanced civilization have it? I don't think they were all duped by magic in the negative sense of the word. I think there's a very important piece in there, and that in modern times we have lost it. And I think that happened with the severance of astronomy and astrology, cutting it into two. Okay, so there's not one different type of astrology. And in Western esoteric astrology, there's not one either. When you sit down and you're like, okay, I'm going to study Western esoteric astrology, I think we all kind of come to it with like, there's one system. There's not. There's 4 systems, 5, 6 systems in there that you can look at. So it's not a collective one system, one size fits all. So those are some of the misconceptions. There's a couple more. Talked about horoscopes, not real. And we looked at just an evolution of how astrology has changed over time. So this idea that it's a stagnant art and science is not true. And a lot of people like to say, oh, is it Charon that comes in it's like the 13th planet or Chiron, there you go. They're like, it messes everyone's zodiacal charts up. And it's not true. Like you can look at different astrology that includes it. Some don't because it doesn't have that major. Yeah, Ophiuchus. Yeah, so it doesn't have that big of an impact on the shifting of things because it's just the pattern it represents. So a lot of people try to trip people up into the astrology, but it is so mathematical, it is so metaphysical that it's really hard to discount 4,000 years of people's contributions and understanding what astrology is. So for those who are like, I don't believe in it, I would ask you to suspend your disbelief for a second and just sit with me for an hour and a half and look at the potential that's there. For those that already believe in astrology, I want you to be more open to another idea of astrology than maybe what you're customary, to, because it wasn't what I thought it was when I sat down, and definitely don't think it is, even for those who have been practicing astrology for years. It's not exactly what we think. All right, so I want to compare the difference between Western esoteric astrology and what is the astrology today from 1970 forward, and that is contemporary astrology. So the purpose between the two. So as I said, with the Western esoteric astrology, this has to do with the soul's journey in and out of matter. It has to deal with gnosis or reunification. It has to do with smoothing the stone and becoming more perfect. That was the whole purpose of astrology from Mesopotamian forward up until about Ficino and the Renaissance. Started to shift again, especially with the scientific revolution, into now it's a more psychological exploration. So you have heavy hitters like Alan Leo and Carl Jung. There's a little bit we were talking right before about Alice Bailey. There's a Theosophy. There's a bunch of other pieces that are in there. So 1900 to 1970, you're going to see that Western, not Western esoteric, but modern Western astrology. That's going to be the Alan Leo camp, Alice Bailey, Theosophy. And then with Jung and deep psychology, you see a big shift out into what we have today with contemporary. And this has to do, again, with more of it's kind of more of a self-help. And I don't really like that phrase because I think that carries it's kind of like a pejorative for some people. But really, it's looking at the deficiencies psychologically within ourselves and trying to improve or fix them. That's the purpose of psychology or astrology today. So when you look at profiling yourself, it's looking more of your psychological approaches versus a spiritual approach. So when we look at the Western Esoteric astrology, when we talk about cosmos, obviously they were looking more at something closer to home, like the solar system. With modern science, we are farther out, in our understanding of what the cosmos mean, but cosmos are cosmos, whether they're close to home or far away. But when we look at Western Esoteric astrology, the cosmos were extremely ordered, very much taken symbolically. And that doesn't mean lightly, just that they represented like the Hermetic axiom, as above, so below. That which we see above is also below us. So it was deeply symbolic, and it had a hierarchy that reflected the divine order that we see here, we also see in the heavens. So it flipped from looking up from this cosmic perspective to a more psychological, going in and looking at everything within me is represented by the cosmos. So the Saturn within me is a difference than the Saturn without me. And it has to do with psyche. How can I see, Mars within me? We talk a lot about astrology with some of the brothers here, and it's like, well, what's your Mars in, and what's your Mercury in, and how we're different, and it's archetypal and it's subjective. How my Mars is going to represent is different than the Mars that you represent. Where the Western Esoteric saw that they were set hierarchical traits to the cosmos. It was not subjective. How you acted upon it, how it presented within you was subjective, but not the actual cosmos itself. Excuse me. So the soul journey I've mentioned quite a few times has to do with the leitmotif, descend, ascend. It's all about the soul's journey moving through matter and out of matter. When we look at contemporary, this again has to do with like the collective unconscious. If you're into Jungian psychology, if you're looking at Freudian psychology, it's how do you outroot the shadow. When I joined Masonry many years ago, there was a lot of talk amongst the members about the ego and whether or not you have to take it out of yourself or completely immerse it, that type of stuff. That's more of the soul's journey in contemporary astrology. The role in the two systems is when we look at Western esoteric astrology, it was a map of initiation. How do you go back to gnosis? How do you enter into matter? Why are you here? And how can you ascend out of it to become one with the divine? And it all had to do with aligning yourself with the cosmos, so that Pythagorean harmony. How do I get myself to align with the music of the spheres, to be a part of that grand symphony? So that way I can't become, not necessarily return to the Father, but become completely dissolved into the light. And again, it's kind of a broken record. The contemporary version is a tool for introspection. It's very individualistic. Like it went from, not that a soul's journey can't be individualistic, but it's more about me, and my psyche and my stuff today, and more about therapy and fixing problems that have been triggered through life tragedy. When we look at fate in the Western Esoteric Tradition, again, fate it's not that it's not there, because it is there. It has to do with the fact that we just accept that the cosmos are what they are. That order is, a hierarchy is what it is, and I cannot change it. That's why the 7 governors in the Hermetic system are they are seen as gatekeepers. They're very, like, that is who they are. You can't change them. And the way you pass those guardians is that you have to harmonize yourself through a virtuous life, which is very Masonic. We're all about ethical living and being. And so harmonizing yourself through virtue is going to be the way that you accept fate. It's a very different idea. If you kind of put that on as a worldview, is not just accepting that things happen for a reason, but that you harmonize yourself with fate by becoming virtuous. When we look at the contemporary model, it has to do with just timing, it being symbolic, that the conditions are there for you to submit to. So it's slightly different perspective. There's not a lot of, it can be about virtue, but it's a symbolic time, something that you are being presented this obstacle because you are ready for the obstacle to be overcome, or it's time that you look at it. So that's the difference between the two systems. We're obviously going to talk about the first one for the rest of the evening, but I wanted to give you a difference of that astrology. Again, this is just the very tip of from time and space, like depending on where you were in the world at what time, it has definitely evolved. It's very much its own cosmic creature, if you. Like I said, there are many different astrological systems. I'm going to talk about Gnostic astrology last, even though I put it first. But when we look at it, you have Hellenistic astrology, Hermetic, Neoplatonic, and Kabbalistic. And when we look at this, the Hellenistic one, again, is going to come out of Alexandria. This is where natal charts come into. So when someone says, what's your chart? They tend to, in Western astrology, talk about like when you were born and what does your chart look like. That's where those came in. You have the introduction of different houses and aspects. I'm not going to go into that in really any great detail, because if you want to learn about that, you need to take an astrology classes, because they're very complicated, because you have transits and you have conjunctions and all these weird stuff that just, it gets really a lot right away. The Hermetic one we're going to look at later as an example. This one is going to come out of the Corpus Hermetica, mostly the poimandries, and it's going to be tied to Babylonian astrology, which again is mathematically based. Same with the Neoplatonic astrology. This has to do with celestial harmonies, similar to the Hermetic one, but with some variations on it. Kabbalistic, you're going to be seeing that obviously being Kabbalah is going to have astrology integrated with Jewish mysticism. And it's a tying of the tree of life, the Sephiroth, with the zodiacal signs and Hebrew letters all coming together. So if you're really big into Jewish mysticism, you might want to check this out. It is very interesting, just how astrology relates. I left Gnostic astrology kind of at the end. It's a loose system. It's not something that's formalized. It's not like its own system that you can actually follow. This is, Christian mysticism. There's definitely was astrology a part of it, but it wasn't its own formalized system. So there's aspects of it. So someone who's a Gnosticism or studies Gnosticism, they'll see traces of it in there, but it's not its own system. The other one I left off was alchemy, because it doesn't have its own system. It just uses astrology. So even in modern times, and we'll get into alchemy in a couple months, even in modern times, there's different alchemy with different astrologies and how to work with them. So there's a lot of different systems. There's a lot of different information. So I'm going to just kind of streamline it to make it a little bit more palatable in regards to just the content. So when we look at what makes astrology, again, when I use astrology, I want you to remarry astronomy with it, because they're truly inseparable. When you look at the reason why I think astrology has such a poor name today is because it has been devoided of that astronomic component. And I think the reason why astronomy has a little bit of a sterility to it, not that the stars aren't fascinating and inspire awe, but it lacks the essence. It's like it's been, the soul's been removed from the science. And so you need both reasons. So mathematics that integrates either ritual, and I'll explain that in a minute, agricultural or civilization or like civil life. There's calendars, Egyptian timekeeping, building your major important buildings according to astronomy, what star is off of the cornerstone and which direction does it face. It's no secret that Masonic temples face east to west. And so you have that is going to be a part of it. And you have a calendar that goes with it to kind of tie everything together, because obviously agriculture, you need to kind of know where things are, when they're going to happen. For civil life, it's based on agriculture. Even in today's world, we don't see it as much, but it's underneath there. You have to have some type of calendar based off of your mathematics. So you need a mathematical framework. The next thing you need is a cosmological worldview. Cosmology is the existence, or the study of, I should say, of the beginning, the middle, and the end of the universe. Like it's why are we here? Where are we going? That type of, it's how everything was formed and where is it going? And when we look at having a cosmological view, whatever it may be, gives us a relationship from the earth to the cosmos. It's that connecting thread between us and the divine. So there's a lot of different cosmological views out there. And do they connect you to the divine is a part of that astrological symbol. The last one is a big one, and it's a philosophical or a theological foundation. So this means you have, again, it doesn't have to be a religion. It can be philosophy. If you look at, again, the Hellenistic version, you had the Egyptian timekeeping with Greek philosophy. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a religion, but that tends to be the case. Like with the Renaissance astrological system, you have, again, that reemergence of Christianity through that particular. And the reason philosophical underpinning or grounding is it allows you to have an animation of the planets. So it's, in a way, it spiritually personifies the planets, because why? We understand what it's like to be a person. So if we can personify the planets, we can better understand their nature, which means it's not that they are people, but by giving them human traits, we understand them better because we understand humanity, nature. So that's why having that theological or this philosophical foundation gives us ability to connect to the cosmos. And it gives it's more of a mystical experience. You can be more direct with the cosmos. You don't have to have an intermediary depending on your theological foundation or philosophical framework. You also have a way to, like I said, a way to understand it and then interpret. So I have a really, really good friend of mine who's been doing astrology for decades upon decades. And the way he explains a Saturn return is he personifies it. He says, when you go through your Saturn return, right, that's a reckoning of all your choices for the last 28 years or so. Imagine if Saturn reached out his hand and took your hand and squeezed it, and it was a crushing force. And either you can try to crush him back, which is Saturn, so you're going to lose, or you can bend the knee, because that's ultimately what he's trying to do. He's trying to get you to submit and to surrender to the consequences of your choices. Because if you can look at your choices and see the consequences and accept them, you're probably not going to do it again if it's a negative effect, right? So if it was a bad decision, bad consequence, probably not going to repeat it. But if you ignore it and you don't look at the things that have happened for the last 28 years and try to fight that experience, then you're bound to repeat what's happening. And it's going to be worse, because what is Saturn doing? He's crushing your hand, trying to get you to submit, and you're not. So it's more painful with the more pressure that's applied. That's an example of how to interpret through a kind of a human personification of a planet. Obviously, Saturn is not a person. So I think that's where that superstition and magical thinking comes in, where people are like, oh man, people really think that these planets are real in the sense of a person. And it's not. It's, again, taken out of context. So it allows people to understand, like Jupiter in modern astrology is expansion. How do you expand in your work? So, imagine what that would look like in regards to personification. So having a theological or a philosophical foundation allows you to, again, interpret. And then it gives you a way to understand and answer your questions of those big existential questions. Why am I here? Where am I going? And what am I doing? Those are the most important questions, because it makes us understand our purpose. Understanding why we're here is a really big deal. So those are the three components. You have to have a mathematical framework, a cosmological worldview, and a philosophical foundation. Those three things get you an astrology. There's other little pieces like ritual and symbolic language, but those are a part of it. Obviously, you need a group of people to follow it for it to be a system. I'm not talking about those things. These are the major, this is like the perfect triad for an astrological system. Gentlemen, we're doing okay with questions?
Brother Mark asks, does sidereal astrology have any impact or consideration in Western Esoteric Tradition?
Brother Mark, I don't know what sidereal astrology is. That is the first time in my life I've ever heard it, but I will write it down because I've never heard of sidereal. I will look it up and we will talk later about that, and so I can answer your question. Great question. Like I said, there's a lot of astrology out there. I am not an expert in all of them. All right, so I want to talk about the Masonic astrological system because that's why we're here, and whatnot. So I want to show you what it looks like for the Masonic astrological system. The foundation of Masonry is geometry. And when we look at that, you can just sit there and say, well, that's a mathematical framework. The universe is perfectly ordered. And geometry is the movement of a singularity through space, right? So when we look at geometry, it is the relationships of shapes one to the other. And it is the foundation of what we do. It's all a part of who we are as Masons. You can talk about hidden geometry and different, architectural buildings. You can talk about sacred geometry. All of these are tradition here in Masonry, not just in universal Co-Masonry, but in all Masonry. It is the basic boundary of what is for Masonry. I can't go into it in too much detail because, again, I would divulge too much, but there's a lot of geometry. And it's not like, if you're like, oh man, I can't do Euclidean or non-Euclidean geometry. Like, it's not a prerequisite. It's something for you to uncover as you go through the experience. You also have a Pythagorean foundation. If you notice, there's the minor tactus here in the image. When you look at it, you have the breakdown from the monad to matter. This is not only, it's a depiction of descent and ascent, the soul going from the point to the four elements, back from the four elements back to the point. So there is a lot in Masonry about Pythagoras and who he is and what he represents. The one thing, I don't think I put it in here. No, I didn't. So the one thing that you can look at is you'll see the 7 liberal arts and sciences in Masonry. And it had a revival in the Renaissance, hence the name Renaissance, where you see that the 7 liberal arts and science. And the best way I've ever heard the 7 liberal arts and sciences be described, it's more specifically the sciences themselves, which is arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. It has to do with the tactus. So if you think of the one, right, that it's separated into two, which gives you numbers, right? If you only have one thing, you don't have an understanding of numbers because there's no need to count. But when you have division, that's when you can start counting and you can start using ways to denote. There's 3 of us here versus, one of you at home. Like there's that separation. So in regards to the 4 sciences in the liberal education, if you're that number, then you're in arithmetic, you're the number experiencing being a number, a singular form. Then when you get into geometry, you're a number experiencing space. What does space feel like? And then that number moves through music, which is the number experiencing time, right? Because music has a lot to do with time, so it's the number moving through time. And then when you get to astronomy, again, which is coiled with astrology, is going to be the number experiencing space and time. And that is the tactus. That is the 7 liberal arts and sciences. We're not going to talk about the trivium, which is logic, grammar, and rhetoric. That's something else. But that's a mathematical framework. Freemasonry very much is very interested in how the soul moves from the one to multiplicity back to unity. And how does it move through space and time? How did we get there? But ultimately, we're looking at relationship of shapes, which is geometry. So you have a tie-in between sacred geometry, hidden geometry, and Pythagoras. The other thing that's really interesting is that you have 2 overtones and underlays in a Masonic ritual, which is going to be the geocentric and the heliocentric models. Again, geocentric is looking at the solar system with the Earth at the center versus the heliocentric, which is looking at the sun at the center. And the reason why you have both of these in Masonry is because we have been around for a very long time. So you're going to see the geocentric model in the way that Lodge is laid out, but you can also interpret it as very much as a heliocentric model as well. So we have different places and ways that you can, and it's not me just stretching it to make it fit. Like you can just sit in Lodge and look at it and be like, oh, that's geocentric. And then another brother can say, oh, I see the heliocentric. And if you're, someone like me, you can see both. It just depends on how you're looking at it and what you're trying to understand at the time. Some people may know, not everyone, we have our own calendar. We don't operate on the same, Gregorian calendar. We have our own Masonic calendar, the calendar, which is the year of light. And we have Time is extremely important to us. It has a very significant meaning in ritual work and in the grand dramas of Masonry. We also have our own liturgical calendar of when festivals and special ceremonies are conducted. You don't do one ceremony at the wrong time of the year because it doesn't align to what is going on in the cosmos at the time. The relationship as planets are far away or super close together. So we have our own calendar. Oftentimes, people don't understand that, but the year of light is extremely important. When we work in Masonic, we're working in the general office. The last thing I want to say here is Joseph F. Newton, and he's a stellar writer, no pun intended. He made this comment: the purpose of Freemasonry is to take the soul of man and build it into a temple worthy of the Most High. And in order to build, you must know math, not only in its technical form, but in its spiritual form and how it relates to the cosmos. If you don't have a level and plumb building, whether that's ethically, morally speaking, or physically speaking, it's not going to withstand the vicissitudes of time. It just won't. It will decay and crumble either rather quickly or quicker than it should. All right, so the cosmological worldview in Masonry. This one's a little tricky because it's not like just one particular one. There's a lot of influences that go on there. But the one that is the most, it's not even prevalent, it is the one that's concrete, is the great architect of the universe. That is at the center of our cosmological worldview. Now, again, how you define the great architect of the universe, that is not going to be told to you. Like, you have to define it this way or that way. It's a being, it's not a being. It's an intelligence, it's not. Like, that is up for each Mason to come to understand. It's not going to be given to you and said, oh, this is how you view the great architect. So that's why we can sit and lodge with all different spiritual beliefs, whether they're an organized religion or a spiritual tradition. It doesn't matter, because we're left up not just to make our own creator in our own image, but to come to understand what that creative force is. Is it a being? Is it, like I said, an intelligence that is of a divine magnitude? What is it? That is something in Masonry we're trying to uncover ourselves, and the rituals help us do that. So the one thing that you can say, the great architect is order, intelligence, and light. Those are probably the three main descriptors. Again, the details and semantics are up to each individual to parse out. The great architect in that divine order is going to create a universe that resembles it. So it's going to, whether it's a Big Bang or a creation story, you're going to see that the universe is very, very orderly, that it all comes together and is coming out of that great intelligence. The Masonic Lodge is going to represent the universe. Like, you can't just like walk in and put the lodge any way you want it. Like, it has very set ways of doing it. In different Masonic rituals, which are put on maybe by different obediences, you might see things in a little bit different spaces, but the ritual is prescribing how that's done. It's not left up to Brother Katie or Brother Benjamin or Brother Patrick to, oh, I kind of like it here. No, I kind of like it there. It's not like that at all. It has a very set way. And I love this example, or the statement rather, bounded east to west, north to south, from the earth to the heavens. The temple is a microcosm of the universe. And to a Freemason, it is the world. It's anywhere we walk is a Masonic temple, meaning that, you don't just do good inside of the lodge. You do virtuous living and valorous conduct no matter where you walk, because all of the creation of the great architect is divine. And so, it doesn't matter what you believe in the specifics, that is going to encompass it all. And then we're looking at human consciousness being a divine blueprint. So that idea that there's something within us, that each one of us has a blueprint, and Masonry is helping us to understand what that is. That's why Freemasonry is universal. It can be for anyone who believes, I would say, in a creative force. That the neo-atheist would not fare well in Masonry, just because the lack of this cosmological belief, it wouldn't graft well. But we all have a purpose. And I think that's something that's really important to be heard. We all have a purpose. It is not the same. And Masonry is trying to help us come to understand that purpose and to live that purpose. And so it gives us ritual to help us bring that drama to life, that we can experience it and see it, and then go find it in the outside world. When I say outside world, I mean outside of that experience. And it allows us to live our destiny, which is funny because Masonry is not fatalistic necessarily, but it does believe that we have a destiny and we have to go find it and we have to go live it to its fullest. So just to recap, because there's a lot going on there, we have a mathematical framework of geometry, Pythagorean, as well as kind of Egyptian timekeeping is all going to be infused into this syncretic mathematical framework. We have a cosmological worldview that's very specific into you have to believe in the great architect in some form. So many years ago, I received an inquiry who was like, yeah, I don't like ritual and I don't believe in anything higher than myself. Those two things right there, if that's you, I'm so glad you're here, but Masonry's probably not going to work well for you because those are the two things, no matter if you do male craft, female craft, or mixed Masonry, you have to have those beliefs. The rituals are meaningless to you. They have no purpose. Now, this one is a pretty long topic, and I'm going to try to, look at my clock here, try to push through it a little fast just because there's so much, and I want to get to the Hermetic system as well, so you can walk away with an example. Remember, syncretic means that Masonry is its own system. It's not that it's borrowing bits and pieces. It has been infused, imbued, and is mixed and has been, fortified by so many influences for all of human history that it's created its own philosophy in that process. Think of it, this is a very mundane, example, but it works. Like you're baking something, right? You're baking a cake. You have all the different pieces, like the eggs, the milk, the flour, the sugar, the salt, the yeast, whatever it is that's in there. Those are all the different things, but when you put it all together, you get something completely amazing and spiritually delicious, if I could say that. Like it comes together and creates its own thing. And that's what Masonry has. It has its own syncretic philosophical foundation. And I'm going to look at little pieces with you of what those are. The major one is the perennial philosophy. This one is where you have this belief that every major religion, every spiritual tradition, there's some essence of truth in it. I'm not saying all of it's true or none of it's true. There's some things that are in there. For example, if you are a Christian and you go sit in a synagogue, you can sit there and you can hear the truth and the wisdom that's in the synagogue. Or you can go to the top of a mountain and hear the wind talk to you, and there's a truth upon its wind, on its lips that's telling you something. Like all of this is that perennial wisdom, that there's truth at the core of every major religion, and that this truth transcends the religion. The religion doesn't own it. It's trying to express it. It's trying to teach it. It's trying to put it in its practitioners, but it doesn't own it. It's not owned by any one particular thing, including Masonry. Masonry tries very hard to be as real to the full philosophy of it, but we're a system too. So when we look at it, it transcends that particular religion that you're looking at. And it's something that it transcends and it's immanent, which is kind of weird because they kind of go against each other, which means that the perennial faith is beyond the tradition. The perennial wisdom is beyond everything, right? It transcends matter, but it's imbued in everything. So the divine spark, everything has the divine in there. There's that animation of the divine. The human soul contains a divine spark that every one of us, no matter how far away they live from the light, have. That is part of the perennial wisdom. Masonry contends that humanity is worth saving and that there is a divine purpose for it, and that divinity is found within. Another part of the philosophical foundation is that the materiality is not real. Like when I say it's an illusion, it's not that it doesn't exist. It's not reality. We're not meant to stay here. We're meant to learn our lessons from here. We're supposed to figure things out and then move on and go back into the divine reality. That's the real. And Masonry flips it from Platonism. Plato says the real is the tangible and the unreal is beyond the veil. Masonry has it in the opposite, where everything is unreal because this reality is not the end all be all. The divine reality is the real. So keep that in mind if you're a big, Neoplatonist. There is a slight difference in language there. The other thing is that the universe is intelligible, symbolic, and hierarchical. Intelligible means that you can know the universe. that if you sit there, and it's not just like you're sitting on top of a mountain meditating for 70 years that you'll come into this understanding. Maybe you would. Most of us have to work through life. And when I say work, we have to do spiritual work. We have to put ourselves in experiences. We have to make wrong choices and have poor outcomes to really understand what the universe is trying to teach us, and that we can come to know it. And this is where you kind of see a weird infusion of deism and theism. Deism meaning that you can come to know the universe through reason, observation, and nature. So when you're looking at nature and you look, it's very hierarchical. I mean, there's a lot of science built on just the mere hierarchy of nature. You know, you can look at it and say, you know, all things have to fight to live. Like they fight gravity. I'm looking at a bunch of evergreens out my window, and it's like they had to fight gravity to get to how tall they are, just like the weed has to fight gravity. And I have to fight the spiritual gravity and friction of things. Like everything can be observed through nature. That's very deistic. What's not deistic is that Masonry also contends that you can know the universe through sacred scripture, through synchronicities and miracles, if you want to call them that you can have, you know, ecstatic experiences religiously and know the universe. That's not very deistic at all. That's very theistic, you know, very I keep saying theosophy, theological experience. So Masonry holds that you can know both. You can do both to know a thing, and that thing being the universe. It's intelligible. So it's an interesting experience, and I think it's very important. Again, you have to have reason and faith to understand the system, because it's comprised of reason and faith. When we look at that philosophical framework, you also have included, you have Hermeticism and Platonism. That's also going to influence that framework that we have in Masonry. We don't have a lot of Gnostic, like there, in the sense that the Gnostics believed that the world is evil, that matter is evil. Masonry, it doesn't necessarily contend in its rituals that it's evil. It definitely thinks it's a place you shouldn't stay in, that you should move on and purify and ascend out of, but it doesn't have that evil to it. That being said, Masonry doesn't say that there's no evil in the world. So that's nuanced, but there's room left for interpretation through experience. Again, it's not whatever you want it to be. It's you have to experience it to understand your knowledge and to grow in that understanding. We have a lot of degrees in Masonry, which are different sets of lessons and rituals that allow you to purify your inner being, your soul. It allows you to learn lessons. It allows you to get out of your current level of consciousness and ascend out of it. And that's also very Neoplatonistic. And then the other one that's really major is Hermeticism. There's a lot of ways that we're Hermetic, but the major one is as above, so below, as within, as without, and so forth. It's kind of a little bit longer quote. Looking at the purification of the self. We have different ways of saying it. We don't necessarily say it that way, but we definitely believe that we're imperfect beings and we're trying to become one with the divine, the great architect, whatever that may be, and that we need to find a way to correct those imperfections, whether you do it through Freud or Jung or some other various, again, that's up to each person to decide. But ritual and tools and symbolism are a way to help us find ourselves in the greater scheme of things and find the greater scheme of things within ourselves. All right, we're almost done with this piece, and I'm going to stop with you and kind of just check in, because I know I've been talking for an hour. All right, so the other part of the philosophical foundation is Masonry is very virtuistic, and I think I made that word up, but it's a good one. It's very based on virtue and has a deep moral philosophy to it. I was arguing with ChatGPT the other day because it was like, it doesn't have any dogma. I'm like, but it does have dogma. Masonry does have dogma. It doesn't have the dogma in the sense of organized religion, but like Albert Pike, morals and dogma. Like it's not just me. Dogma is a set of beliefs that you have to have. And if you're curious on what those are, you can look at our landmarks. I don't know if you gentlemen want to find that on our website and throw it into the chat if someone wants to look at it. But the landmarks, like the belief in something higher, that's a dogma. Now, again, we don't tell you, maybe like in an organized religion, like, oh, it's the divine is this, this, and this. Like, it's not done that way. But we do have dogma. It's just very minimal. It's very general, but it's very important. If you don't believe in certain things, like the permanence of the soul, then Masonry doesn't really fit you, because it talks a lot about how the soul progresses. If you don't believe in that, then it doesn't do anything for you. We also have, again, allegory, which is teaching through story, myth, and drama. Obviously, symbolism is a huge part of it, to help instruct and to elevate what we're doing in this world. The other part is we have a lot of stoicism and enlightenment values. So if you're a big, stoic, there's, again, getting those untamed emotions in check, trying to rise above the chaos and drama and not get stuck in the quagmire of materiality, looking at how to observe things through reason and through understanding, not be so quick to use the guillotine, if I may, and really trying to build a moral life based on that. But we don't leave out the mystical or spiritual insight. Like, we do not sever those two. You need, again, have faith and reason. They need to cooperate in order for this existence to harmonize itself with the universe. And then we have a theosophical influence, which makes us an esoteric Masonry, not a charitable Masonry that many are aware of. And again, we have a spiritual hierarchy. We have a cosmic evolution. How did the universe evolve? And most importantly, we talk a lot about spiritual initiation, but karma. I don't know if we use that word specifically, but the idea that our actions produce an outcome that we're responsible for, and that we have to mitigate its impact or repay the lesson that we have put on others. So there is that karmic experience that we're here for. Whether, if you believe in reincarnation, it's in multiple lifetimes, or if you just the one of, descending into matter, you're picking up these karmic lessons that you have to do. And again, there's our Joseph Newton. Freemasonry is the drama of the soul's moral and spiritual growth enacted in the form of working tools of geometry. So all of that comes together to create the Masonic astrological system. And again, I didn't give specifics in ritual because I can't, but someday when you're a Mason, let me know and we can talk. So we have a mathematical framework, that's sacred geometry, or hidden geometry, Pythagorean philosophy. We have a cosmological worldview, that's divine reality, deistic and theistic, as well as a philosophical foundation that is infused between perennial wisdom, Neoplatonism, and Hermeticism, with an influence of theosophy, humanism, and stoicism. So there's a lot going on in there. And when you sit in lodge one day and you're looking around, you hopefully will see what I'm talking about, because it's very impressive. Notice none of it told you that on such and such date you're going to have such and such event. Like, none of that came out. So astrology is very different. It is a context for the soul. That's ultimately what astrology was meant to be, is to understand how the soul experienced this materiality on its own personal landscape. I'm going to stop here because I've been talking for over an hour, and I want to check in with everyone, see how we're doing, see what questions or comments are coming up. And so the floor is open for either one of those. Or you're just happy with me talking. No questions or comments coming in? Brother Maya. Hold on one second. We're going to get you on mute.
You made it clear that certain individual experience. Would you also say that Masonic astrology is very interested in, or deals with, energy and force and its impact on, groups, large numbers of people or larger entities, and sort of their evolutionary growth as opposed to an individual?
I mean, if you believe in the spiritual hierarchy and you believe the impact of patterns and archetypes, and I would say you absolutely have to include groups. You can look at the natal chart of the lodge. We have, when we open a lodge for the first time ever, we have its birthday, more or less, the location, the time, all of that. And you can look at each lodge has its own, it's kind of its own individual, even though it's comprised, we're the cells of it. It comprised of all these individual people and their particular astrological makeup. But a lodge has one, and a lodge can make up a district. So the district has one, and you can keep going up, and that's just on the material form. And we're just an expression of the spiritual. So I think absolutely when you look at spiritual hierarchy in Masonry, although it's not explicit, it's not going to turn to page 25 of the ritual and you'll find it there. It's not like that, but through observation and clear understanding, you can definitely see how it impacts everything, because the cosmos is everything. Like, to exclude one group or one type of thought form or whatnot, like you are severing it from the whole, which you can't do. So the short of that is, yes, I do think it impacts all different levels, the individual all the way up to the entire cosmos. Tyler, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I feel like I'm gonna burst with ideas and questions, so I'll try to keep it short. But when we were talking about like the sort of metaphors that we use to describe how we interact with the different planets or stars and such, in an astrological sense. And what I keep thinking about, and I'm almost a little disappointed that we didn't do Kabbalah first, because I feel like that is such a great foundation to understand these things from. But the way that I grew to understand it, I hope this helps somebody else if you're like on the fence about this stuff. Once you like take the tree of life and you have all the Sephirot laid out, you kind of understand like the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet. And then you can take that and interface it with basically every other world mythology that has ever existed. You can even get into like 12th planet Zachariah Sitchin levels of, mapping on other ideas onto the tree of life as we know it. But if it just simply taking the Roman gods, like the planets as we have them, including the moon and the sun, and mapping it onto that. When you're using metaphors like reaching out and shaking Saturn's hand and he's crushing you or whatever, and then you just like look at it in the same way that you would look at the Kabbalah chart, this stuff starts to make a lot more sense, at least for me. So I'm kind of hoping that folks will either grab a tarot deck or something, or whatever you got to do to just let go of the really intricate, like taking the metaphors that we're using verbatim and they're just like looking at it as like a way of understanding the universe, which I think you did touch on that last slide too. Just letting that go, this makes a lot more sense. All of it.
Thank you very much for that, Tyler.
Thank you.
All right, Billy, your hand is raised.
I was curious, why, or how rather, how do you think astrology works? And I have my own ideas, some of it having to go back to what you were saying about colors and music and sort of like the music of the spheres and vibrations, but I'm curious if you have a framework for astrology, specifically how it works, or maybe you're going to get to that later.
You talking like houses and ascendants and conjunctions and transits and stuff like that, or are you talking about something else? Can you unmute him, please?
Fine. Okay.
He's in my upper right hand corner of my TV. Oof, my computer. I don't know if you have the same view. There he is. Go ahead. Nope, right here. Asked unmute. There you go.
There we go. No, I mean, like, why do you think the planets exert influence? Because a lot of people would say, those are far away out there. How could they possibly be influencing us?
Thank you for the clarification. To me, when you look at everything, everything is in nature, whether it's on Earth or outside of it, is connected. We are made up of a very impressionable solution of various chemicals, mainly, and the main solvent is water, right? And water is extremely influenced. The pulls of the tides by the moon is what keeps life. It gave life, and it's what keeps life going. And the sun is what also keeps life going. Like, if you got rid of one or the other, we wouldn't have life. Like, it's so elegant. And when we look at the planets, again, it's not like, oh, Mercury is really messing up my communication. Like, that's not how I view astrology. And I don't think that actually is how astrology is viewed. It's like, all right, well, and I'm making this up because I don't remember my chart off. I have to look it up, all my aspects. But it's like, oh, like my communication, which is Mercury, if you have a hard time remembering it, Aquarius, let's say, which Aquarians, the pattern of an Aquarian, it doesn't mean that everyone's the same, but the generality of Aquarian is that they have a hard time communicating, that they're on their own beat of the drum, that they don't really follow what most people, how they communicate. So you're like, oh, well, I struggle with communication. Let me go look at my chart. Oh, okay, well, there's a pattern in there. This pattern is being represented by a particular planet. It's a lot easier to say Mercury than have a whole explanation every time you get to communication. That planet is going to be a symbol of that pattern. And that pattern was impressed upon me when I was born, because that's where the sun, or that particular planet, in this case, Mercury, was when I was brought into this realm. So to me, when you look at it from a pattern perspective, that it's an archetype, that on the whole, Mercury tends to be communication. It can be a bunch of other subcategories, but it can be communication. Mars, what's Mars going to be related to? The way we fight, the way we interact, relationships, war, that type of stuff. There's 12 different ways, 12 different archetypes, and people can dissect it into nothing. Welcome to deconstructionalism. And I guess you can obliterate anything, and nothing will hold an obliteration. So if you're looking to try to disprove, like, you'll find your way through it. But when you look at it from archetypes and patterns, whether you're looking at a soul's journey or you're looking at a psychological review of yourself, it still holds. And that, to me, is the best way to look at the planets. You can personify it if you'd like to personify that archetype, but understanding the archetype, it helps me understand other people. I use it more for other people than myself. Not that I don't use it for myself, but one of the examples I had, and this is anecdotal, so throw it out if you don't want to pay attention, is many years ago I was teaching and I had a student that was very difficult, like 2 students in 2 different situations. And they were just wonderful children, and they were driving me crazy, as teenagers do. And one kid, we couldn't connect no matter how hard I was trying to get him to do what he needed to do. I'm not his friend, but I have to find a way to motivate him without pissing him off or breaking him. And so one day I was just exasperated, and I just looked at him and I said, "When's your birthday?" And, of course, he's in the middle of fighting me, so he was thrown off. And he gave me his birthday, which it happened to be my birthday. And I was like, oh, I understand myself a little bit better. And I understood. And I even told him, I said, oh, I apologize. I'm sorry. And we're still friends on Facebook 10, 15 years later. And he still says happy birthday to me, because it just fixed the problem. Another student was doing the same thing in a different school, a different time. I asked him his birth sign, and he was a Leo. God love him. He wants to be the center of attention. So I gave it to him, and we moved on. So it's a tool. But I'm not going to sit there and say that kid was that one day, or that kid is that one day and can't be anything else. But it is a method to understand human nature. And by understanding human nature, you can understand the soul's ascent. So a very long answer to a question, but I think it's important not to just make it mythological like gods, and that you have no control, because a lot of people use astrology as a scapegoat to getting out of the consequences. Oh, that's just the way the stars work. That doesn't work with astrology. Brother Mark, you never talk. I'm so happy to see your hand. What do you have to say, Brother Mark?
Just got a quick question. The history of the human race, the human civilization, has been largely group identity. The Romans talked about being Romans, and the Greeks, and so on and so forth. And the idea of this individuality is a fairly recent construct overall in society for individual rights and things of that nature. Modern astrology appears to be a reflection of that process. I don't know if it's appropriate to call it evolution or not, but could that have an impact on Masonic astrology at some point?
I think it does, because I did it too before I started studying the history of astrology and really trying to understand it. Like, you come in and you have this experience with astrology, whether, back in my day, it was on the tabloids and the grocery stores. You'd pick it up and it would say, oh, your birthday's this, and this is your horoscope for the month. Like, it was very much individualized. So you come in with that understanding, and then you put that on top of Masonry because you're trying to understand the astrology that's in Masonry. The problem is you have to flip it on its foundation and look at the underpinnings and say, well, what is the astrology that Masonry came out of? And that's when you start realizing it's not so much about your psychic inadequacies, but it's more about your soul's need to purify, which it sounds like they're the same thing, but they're actually very different. So I think that people do put it in Masonry, but I don't think Masonry necessarily, not that I'm saying you can't keep doing that because it does work in some way. But I don't think Masonry was intending it to be so individualistic, because Masonry, a lot of people who have been Masons that come to Universal Masonry is usually because they're looking for community, because Masonry is not something that you can do by yourself on your own. It's a group work. You need that group identity. So sitting there and reading my Jungian chart on whether or not I'm a, what is it, INTJ or whatever it is, it's like that, like that's interesting, but that to what end? But if we look at it and say, oh, look at the officers of lodge, and I challenge you to do this and any other Mason, look at the officers of lodge. Hopefully you know them well enough to know their general birthday. And you can say, oh, the master and the two, the first and second, wardens are, one's a Leo and one's a Sagittarius. What does that mean for the governance? You can look at it and as a collective, and I would recommend that. That's more of a modern approach, but also you want to look at what is the astrology meant? What is it meant in its own context? So I think you can already apply it, Brother Mark. I don't know if that should be the end all be all, because Masonry is a group experience. It is a group identity and more than it is individualistic. Brother Eli.
Good evening. I like to listen and understand, and I'm mainly making some comments after I heard Tyler mentioning his interest in Kabbalah. There is a book called in Hebrew Sefer Yetzirah, the Book of Creation, and it is written in that book that the Creator engraved like a sculpture his world with 32 paths of wisdom, 22 letters, and 10 numbers. And then it says, using the Hebrew words, that the world was created with Sefer, Sapar, Besipur, with letters, again, with numbers, and with a story. So, and then there are a lot of beautiful things in there. But what I love the fact is that the world was created with a story. And very often we hear stories, and stories use words in a different way that we use them. So sometimes we believe we may disagree with someone, but in reality, we are talking about the same thing, just using different words. I studied Bitul Hayesh, and Bitul Hayesh is eliminate your ego. So take your ego and check it with your coat at the entrance, and just come and listen and try to understand. So sometimes I feel in all these wonderful talks that if I'm trying to think what I think or what my opinion is, I'm distracted from hearing the story. And so there is a lot I could be telling, but the summary of what I'm trying to share is we all have a story, but we use different words to talk about the same thing. And I hope one day is an opportunity to share more about Kabbalah ideas. When you use the word soul and the journey of the soul, many things that can describe that using a different word. And in Kabbalah, there are like 4 levels of soul: Ruach, Nefesh, Neshama, Yehidah. So there is a basic soul that any living thing like grass has, that's Nefesh. Then Ruach is something that animals have. Neshama that people have, and Neshama is breath. And then there is a story that I do not know if I'm talking too much, please tell me. So there is a story when Sabbath comes that people receive an extra soul that is more powerful and more spiritual. So his soul goes and takes a rest and goes to heaven. And the person has this stronger soul and can live and experience his spirituality deeper. And sometimes it may happen when the soul is returning, it makes a mistake, it goes into someone else. And they explain that as a change in personality. So, but this is a topic I hope we will have opportunity to share in another time. Thank you for allowing me to share.
Thank you, Brother Eli. Brother Yang, you're last on the docket before we go to the closing.
Good day to you, Brother Katie. You look great today.
Thank you.
I totally agree with you. The one you said that is, everything is connected to us, the universe and everything, as above, so below, so within, so without. Um, the thing is, I really, really want to believe in astrology, but we have our own thing here in Asia. It's Oriental thing, but as a Western astrology, I really want to believe in that, but I don't know how to start, because the first time, it caught me is when I'm joining the order, Brother Matias asked me, what is your birthday and your time of birth? That's why it caught my attention that what's this? Then I got an idea of astrology. But the thing is, you told when you told a while ago that the center of the universe is the sun, right? But how if there's other belief that the sun is not the center of the universe, which for me as myself, I believe the other way around. The earth is the center of the universe, and the sun and the moon is the one rotating in the earth. Is there any possibilities for us with other beliefs that we can still practice astrology?
Absolutely, Brother Yang. The method you believe in is anthropocentric, which is the man is the center. You have heliocentric, and when I say the universe, remember it's replying solely to the solar system, because back in the day they didn't, the event horizon was the solar system. So that is interchangeable. So you have the geocentric, the heliocentric, and the anthropocentric, meaning man is at the center. So absolutely, there's a lot of different ways to look at it. That's the beauty of Masonry. It's not that it can be anything you want, but it has a system that is so vast, because the universe is so vast, that it allows for many understandings to exist simultaneously. So you believe in one way that the earth is, you maybe believe that it's flat and I believe it's round, or vice versa, and you believe that the deity is this and I believe it's that. Like, we can still sit in lodge and still have a communion with the great architect that is legitimately equal to each other, although our experiences may be different, but it's just as deep as one another, because Masonry is not meant to create one type of seeker. It embraces all seekers, because the universe holds all seekers. You can't exclude. So when you talk about, well, you're in Asia right now, you have very different beliefs than the Western. Well, it's all part of the same faith, that perennial idea that we all have the truth in some form. Where it's going to be different is the worldview. You're going to see things differently coming from an Oriental viewpoint than I am from a Western viewpoint. But it comes in that viewpoint because that's the one that you grew up with, the one that you were influenced the most with. And I have the one that's Western because that's the environment I grew up in. And so if you gave me your worldview, it's not that I wouldn't understand it, but I would struggle to understand it fully. Just like you have, wow, that's different. Why do you think that? Because our cultural and religious and personal influences have a different worldview to it. And Masonry seeks to embrace all that is of the light in order to understand how to unite all. Go to a temple, a mosque, a synagogue, a cathedral. It doesn't matter what house of the divine you go to, you can find refuge as a Mason, because it doesn't matter what truth is speaking, what language it's speaking, it's still truth in the underpinnings.
Thank you very much, bro.
So it was good to see you, Brother Yang, and I'm looking forward to seeing you in the fall. All right, we're almost out of time. I apologize. I'm going to go over, but I will try not to go over by too much. I want to respect your time. And I don't know how we're going to do this, but we'll figure it out. All right, so again, I can't go through the Masonic for each detail, because again, I can't divulge what we do, but the one I picked was Hermetic. And the reason why I picked the Hermetic to show you an astrological system is because it spoke to me. It's not for any other purpose, that I just really, really liked it over the Neoplatonistic one, and someone might like the Kabbalah version, and so forth and so on. So Again, I've said it quite a bit. The reason why I like the Hermetic one is because it really talks about the soul's descent and ascension. So when you look at Hermeticism, if you're a big Hermetic person, you really need to take up the understanding of astrology in the Hermetic sense, because it is totally different and it frames out your worldview of life, understanding this astrology. So again, it's not fatalistic. It is going to help you understand why you are the way you are and what you have to do to get out of here. So it isolates and diagnoses the inharmony that each one of us has within our soul. And then it allows us to go through whatever practice method, whether we use ritual, alchemy, prayer, meditation, whatever it is, to realign ourselves to help smooth out the discordance back into divine harmony. And again, it's an initiatory path of return. So this is a chart and a very artistic viewpoint of a natal chart. Just it's generic. It's not of any one particular person. You have a few things that you need to pay attention to. There's 4 things, and the 4th one is not that big. So keep in mind the context of where Hermeticism came out of, which is a geocentric model. The geocentric model is not wrong. Like, especially growing up in science, they always tell you like, oh yeah, they were really misled and it's heliocentric. Like, no, like if you stand on Earth and you look out, it's geocentric. But the fact that we can stand on top of the Earth, metaphorically speaking, and look out that way, and we can see that we're literally on the side moving around something else, they're both accurate. Just like Brother Yane's perspective of man being at the center is also accurate. So again, it just depends on what view you're looking at. So you have, and I'll pull the 3 out that really, really matter. You have planets, the 7 classical planets. This is what the soul, what it has that's functioning, and I'll explain that. You have the 12 zodiacal signs, and it starts from Aries and works to Pisces. No, I always flip it. Pisces to Aries or Aries to Pisces. Aries. Thank you. I always flip it. You descend through Aries, through Pisces, and then when you ascend, you go in the reverse. So you go from Pisces to Aries. So you have the planets, the 7 classical, that includes the sun and the moon, Mars, Mercury, Jupiter, Venus, and Saturn. And then you have houses, and houses are different, like where these particular inharmonies are going to express themselves in your life. And I will show you what I'm talking about. The ascendant. So the way you want to look at this in a Hermetic standpoint is as the soul is breaking from the one, the source, it's going to descend through the 7 planets. And then think about, you have the Earth at the center, and around it you have the 12 zodiacs. And so you're going to ascend through the 7 planets and the zodiac. And then you're going to get the final way into Earth, the final moment you hit materiality. That's called your ascendant. And that's something that's actually still used, that word today is still used. And that's the planet, or the zodiac, I should say, that was in the East when you hit this world. So if it's not necessarily the one that you were born under, like, oh, I was a Taurus. It's what was sitting on the East when you came in. That was your doorway into materiality. Okay, this is really a lot. I'm not going to go through each one of them, but so when you go through in Hermetic astrology, and as the soul descends into matter, it breaks away from the source, you have what's called archetypal influences. So you pick up your soul as it passes through the moon. It's going to pick up a way that you react to, nurture, and remember. So you're a habitual mind. It's going to pick up that on the way in, and then it's going to pick up the way you think. So this is how you learn. And again, it's not that we all learn the same way. It's just that you have to have a hardware, and then you have to add the software. If I can use that. Each one of these is a hardware. You have 7 components, and the soul, as it descends into matter, picks up each one of these hardwares as it goes into this experience that we're in. All of us have identity. All of us have attractions. All of us have boundaries. This is what makes up the hardware of who we are. So what is functioning is the planet. The sun is going to be your core self. It's your identity, your individuality, your exertion of will, according to Hermetic astrology. So as you're coming through into matter, you're going to pick these up. This is what, kind of like the pieces that you pick up as you're putting together who you are as an individual in this experience. Then you have, interestingly enough, when you're descending, so you go through the 7 classical planets, and then you have the belt of the zodiac. And as you pass through the belt, it's not that you just like, you pass through and you only hit one sign. You pass through the belt. So you go all the way around. And because no one's perfect, despite my best effort, we have what you can call 12 afflictions or 12 punishments that you picked up. So Aries gives you wrath. So some of you don't have a lot of wrath, good for you, but you still have it. Like, you have a temper, and it's just, there's levels to it. It's not, again, everyone's complex. You have avarice, deceit, grief, rashness, you have injustice, you have malice, you have all these things that you come in. And again, all of us have these, they're just in different expressions. And you're going to pick them up, and they're your punishments. They're the afflictions that you have in life that create disharmony, right? So you pick these things up on your soul. So when you come in on that ascendant, when you're born and that gateway opens up, this is the landscape that you have to live in. This is your spiritual landscape. And Masonry would take this and say, okay, I have a lying problem. I'm making that up. I really don't have a lying problem. But let's say I have a lying problem. It's like, okay, so my Gemini has to do, like, I picked up deceit. I'm not very honest as an individual. How can I use the Masonic tools around me to, I believe, integrate? Some people think outroot, depends on what you think. How do I fix this so that I can harmonize with divine order? Because when I am being dishonest, I am not in harmony. I am causing discordance around, and it's not good. And so once I start being less deceitful or not deceitful at all, I am creating I'm smoothing out the stone, becoming more perfect in who I am as an individual. In Masonry, we talk a lot about not being rash. When I first came into astrology back in the day, I remember telling my husband, I was like, astrology's stupid. I think that's how young and dumb I was. I was like, it's stupid. And he was just like, I wouldn't be so rash if I were you. That was in Hermetic astrology. That's my Leo coming out, because I have an extreme rashness. And so Masonry is like, no, you shouldn't be so rash, because this is not real. You have to figure out what is real. And oftentimes, more than often, we're not correct. So these are the 12 punishments. Let me see if okay. I'm going to go backwards in the slide. I'm going fast. I apologize. Now you have 12 houses. These houses, every one of us have. And this is the Hermetic version. It's not the modern version. There's houses in the modern version. But you have, like, the different houses represented. There are also 12 of them. They don't always match the zodiac. So like your house of life, which is going to be your identity and the mask of your personality, yours is going to be in Pisces, and another person's is going to be in Capricorn. Like, they're not the same. And if we look at what Capricorn is, Capricorn, where are you, my Capricorn, has to do with either faithfulness or treachery. So are you a very faithful person in Hermetic astrology, or are you more treacherous? And so that will express itself differently depending on which house it is in. And you have the house of death. One thing I will say, whether it's contemporary astrology or ancient or Western astrology, no astrology can tell you when someone's going to die. Like, that's the one major rule about astrology. It can tell you about influences. It can say, there's a major loss. That's usually Pluto. There's a major loss in your life. It doesn't mean that, someone's going to die. It could be that you lose a job, or, some understanding is crushed, whatever it is. So be careful when someone's like, oh, someone's going to die in your life. Like, it's not so specific like that. You have the house of God or religion. These are the things that are aspects of yourself. So if you look at yourself as a mansion that has 12 houses in it, and then you have the zodiac that goes around it in the belt, and then you have the 7 planets that comes out, that is the soul's landscape of existence. That's Hermetic. And Masonry is not so specific to this whatsoever, but it has its own style of understanding all of the landscape that we live through. And I'm going to go backwards now. When you die in Hermetic astrology, and I'm almost done, stay with me for 2 more minutes, you are going to shed all of the punishments and afflictions and gain a virtue or a power back. So as you go backwards through the zodiac, you're going to shed your malice and pick up goodwill. You're going to shed your envy and pick up kindness, because these are the virtues that get you back to the divine. And if you believe in reincarnation, you're going to do this over and over again. And each one of these archetypal forces are going to be influenced about all the decisions you've made in your life, positive or negative. And ultimately, the karmic rendition of it all is that you want to come out neutral. And how you get rid of positive karma, I'm still trying to figure it out. But you come out neutral. So this is a very vast system. I like covered it in 9 minutes. There's so much to go through, but just think of the artistry and the beauty of the soul coming through planets and picking up all of these hard pieces, and then it being wired with all of these individual influences, and then you have these houses that, like, no wonder why people are like, yeah, I'm not a Sagittarius. Well, no, you're Sagittarius in everything else. And maybe you don't have Sagittarius in your chart at all. Maybe, you know, you have all different aspects. So hopefully you can see that astrology, whether you believe in it now I'm asking you to go back into your belief system. So if you suspended your disbelief in astrology, you can go back into it now. At least you can see that astrology isn't about a horoscope and your sun sign. It has to do with the soul. If you're looking at the Western version, the soul's ability to understand what it is and what it isn't, and trying to reconcile that, to do a reclamation of the divinity that it has within itself and return to that divinity. If you're looking at it at a modern perspective, on that contemporary psychological, again, it's the same thing. You are complex. Like, just because your house is showing that you have this particular sign doesn't mean that you're fixed to it and that you can't change it. It means that it's there. It means that you should be aware that that force is, you know, that pattern, it has a force to it, and that it's influencing things. That's why you hear a lot of people talk about, you know, Mercury in retrograde. You shouldn't sign contracts rashly, you know, when it's in retrograde, meaning that communication is difficult. It's not saying that if you sign a contract in Mercury in retrograde, you're going to fail. It doesn't say that. It just says, hey, just be really thorough when you read the small print, because it might be something in there that you didn't see. And then if you rush into it, you're going to really be sad about. All right. I want to thank you all for coming out and for that power feeding at the end there and the fire hose feeding. I appreciate you spending your time with me for the last hour and a half and allowing me to talk for an hour and a half. I could spend a lot more time on it, but we don't have that. So next month we'll look at Kabbalah, not astrology, looking at it as a Western tradition and a science. And then, as I said earlier, we'll follow up with alchemy, which I don't have a bias, but I really like alchemy. Maybe that's just because of my background in science. I really enjoy it. And Kabbalah as well. Like, they're all just very beautiful systems in and of itself. So I hope you will join me. And if you are a believer in astrology, I hope you found something in there that challenged your thought and beliefs and maybe inspires you to go look at something. And if you don't believe in astrology, I hope you walk away correcting some misconceptions that are, oh yeah, it's not that. I don't necessarily believe in it, but it's not what people think it is. And I hope that's what we all walk away with. So thank you to Brother Patrick and Brother Benjamin, who always hang out with me more than they want to and help me with Masonic Seminar. And thank you to everyone on all the various platforms. Have a wonderful night, evening, morning, wherever you are. Be safe.